Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Craigslist horror stories. First story. Your gut is trying to tell you something. Mike and I met about 4 years ago through a mutual friend. I was so exhausted with the apps by that point, so I jumped at the chance to get to know an attractive and smart guy in person. He and I hit it off and have been together ever since. Last month, we decided to move in together. The timing felt right for both of us, and so the rental search began. Now, the city we live in is pretty big, and unfortunately, market rates are outrageous. He and I have run into issues finding something in our ideal budget. Neither of us can justify the going rate for most 1 to 2 bedroom places. Most of our friends live near the city, and our goal was to do the same. But we were flexible and could compromise for the right property. When Mike found a 3-story townhouse under market value and within reasonable proximity to our social stratosphere, we both, of course, thought it was too good to be true. This has to be a scam. No way this is a legitimate rental. Mike mused while scratching his forehead. He and I were curled up in my bed, snacks everywhere, combing through any promising listing online. I leaned over and commented with the same level of skepticism. Yeah, $1,300 for an entire house? What does it say? 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. Mike said, "You're right." I responded. Now, after combing through so many rental listings, you start to develop an eye for the bullshit. Any listing with erratic grammar and punctuation is a no. Any listing that requires proof of ID be texted to the owner before you can even see the place is a no. And any post with neon text and phone numbers plastered across the pictures is a no. Basically, anything on Craigslist. But we were on Rentler, and so far the posts seemed legit. Pictures were nice and clear. Summary had proper sentence structure and a valid email and contact number for Crystal, the realtor/owner. "Where is it?" I asked. Mike zoomed out on the listing map. "Oh, it's maybe 15 minutes away from Steve and Mackenzie, our friends." After laughing about it for a minute and moving on in our search, we eventually circled back. I mean, it couldn't hurt just to get more information, right? So, Mike texted Crystal to set up an appointment. Crystal responded within 20 minutes and gave us a couple times/days that would work for her. I asked Mike to confirm the price in the listing and ask about other utilities, deposit, etc. to make sure we truly understood the cost in case Crystal accidentally posted the wrong amount. But no, what was in the ad was correct. The day of the viewing came. Mike offered to drive, and so, on a Wednesday afternoon, we piled into his Honda Civic and set off for the property. He and I lived on the west side of town, about 10 minutes from each other. This property was on the east side, so it took about 30 to 40 minutes to arrive. When we were almost there, I took note of the neighborhood. I hadn't been here before, but it seemed like a regular suburban neighborhood. Lots of houses. "Oh, this road here, McClellan Drive. Turn left." I pointed at the street while glancing down at my phone's navigation. We pulled onto an empty residential street. The road continued for a short distance before coming to a dead end. On the right side was a row of 5 houses with stubby white picket fences. Some driveways looked occupied, but no one was outside. On the left was a tall, white fence that ran all the way down to the end. It looked like a gated community with one entrance at the very end of the street. The fence was solid, so I could not see into the community from the street. Google Maps encouraged us forward. We turned into the open entrance, and Mike parked a short distance past the gate onto another empty road. The gated community only consisted of about 6 townhouses in a row facing us. We turned into basically a development lot. Of the 6 townhouses, only 2 looked occupied. The house at the opposite end had 1 vehicle parked in their driveway, and 1 house in the middle of the cluster had a giant flag repping Edmonton Oilers. No, we do not live in Edmonton. Our destination was for the end unit closest to us. Strange, no vehicle was parked out front, but the garage was closed. Maybe Crystal parked inside. Seems oddly empty, no? I asked Mike. We arrived precisely at 2 p.m. Yeah, eerily empty. Didn't realize this was for a new development. Still, that price is unbeatable, huh? Let me check in with Crystal and see if she is here. Mike pulled out his phone from his pocket and noticed 2 missing texts from about 15 minutes earlier. Crystal, I am on site. 1:37 p.m. Crystal, feel free to walk in when you get here and holler. I'm just putting cookies in the oven. 1:45 p.m. Guess we can just walk in? Mike looked over at me and could tell I was thinking. While he was checking his phone, I continued to survey the scene. We were parked directly facing the rental unit. We had a clear view of the entire line of townhouses and their windows. Each unit had a basement, main level, and upper level, and each level had 1 to 2 front-facing windows. Strange, the unit we were supposed to tour had curtains or blinds covering every window. I hesitated with my hand on the passenger door. Why would Crystal have all the windows closed on a sunny day when she has potential renters coming by? I squinted at the basement window. Did its curtains just move? Mike agreed. Yeah, that is weird. His phone lit up again, and he looked down to read the new text. Crystal, hey, I see you too just got here. Hope you like chocolate chip cookies. Okay, a little creepy. Did you see her head poke out? He looked at me inquisitively, but my eyes were still fixed on the basement window. I broke my gaze off the house to check my side mirror. From my side, I had a perfect view of the gate behind us. Black bars tall. I couldn't see a keypad on the exterior, so I wondered if there was a remote control. Crystal must have it open during tours. My eyes went back to the house. Oh, there again. Did you see it? I nodded towards the house, my eyes on the basement window. Someone had parted the curtain just for a moment. Someone was watching us. Why were they in the basement? Mike looked directionless at the property, uncertain about what I was referring to. My stomach was starting to twist. I didn't like this. Mike, I said quietly and calmly, I think we should go. Fortunately, he didn't need much convincing. He nodded. Before he could shift into reverse, his phone lit up once more. New text from Crystal. Crystal, quit being a tease. Crystal, come in. Mike let out a short gasp, threw his phone into the cup holder, and muttered, what the dash? I felt like I was going to throw up. I heard a low mechanical were somewhere outside and looked back at my side mirror. My eyes grew. All I could muster was a quiet, urgent plea, the G-gate's closing move. Mike sprung into action. He shifted into reverse and backed Kay out of there in just enough time to clear whatever hell awaited us inside that house. As we sped away from the gated community and down McClellan Drive, I felt bile rising in my throat. The neighbors had come out. Each house, each white picket fence now had an occupant standing behind it. Some men, some women, all staring menacingly at us. They just stood there. I noticed their heads turning towards us in the rearview mirror as we flew by, stares fixed on us. Mike's mutters turned into shouts. What the? We were doing at least 20 over for God knows how long. I could hear his phone vibrating over and over in the cup holder. Mike drove and drove for what felt like eternity. Our only direction was away. Far, far away. Eventually, after managing to not vomit all over my lap, I urged him to pull into the nearest grocery store. We sat in a lot of a Target for who knows how long. When I broke out of my trance, I realized his phone had stopped vibrating. We looked at each other, then down at his phone. Mike picked it up and found not 1, not 2, but 7 missed texts from Crystal. Crystal, quit being a tease. Come in. Crystal, I said come in. We're waiting for you. Crystal, we're all here to say hi. We can't wait to meet you. Crystal, we can't wait to meet you. Come in. Crystal, runners make the skin crawl, runners make the skin sweat. Crystal, runners make the skin sweet. But the last text made us both sick to our stomach. It was a GPS pin of our current location, the Target parking lot, sent seemingly before we even arrived. This location was not planned. It was by chance we ended up here. We had to keep moving. Before we had the chance to shift in a drive, my phone chimed. Mike and I froze. I shakily pulled my phone out of my pocket and looked down at the screen. The bile was rising again up my throat. Unknown. Nowhere to go but here. Included was a picture taken from the exterior of the rental property. The camera pointed at the basement window, and the curtains were now parted. Someone was there. Someone with greasy hair and pale skin, with the widest inhuman grin I've ever seen. They were pressed up against the glass as if they were anxiously awaiting something. Someone. Us. Unknown. Runners make the tastiest treats. Second story. I bought a haunted piano on Craigslist. I am a musician. Not a terribly great one, but still I consider myself a musician. I can play with the best of them, and I know my way around an instrument or two. More importantly, I am a collector. A collector of various items ranging from the odd to the obscure. There is no rhyme or reason to my collection. It consists of anything uniquely interesting I can get my hands on. That is why, when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a vintage, rustic, red piano, I couldn't help but reach out to the seller. The ad's title seemed normal enough. OLD piano, free to a good home. I had seen countless like it before. Nothing out of the ordinary, and certainly not something that would normally grab my attention. Still, I felt a strange need to click on it. Perhaps I was bored, or maybe I just wanted to see what it looked like. Either way, I gave in to my compulsion. Upon clicking the ad, there was no picture. Just an anomalous, but intriguing story. It read something like this. I'm offering my piano to anyone who is willing to come and pick it up. It is very old, but still playable. I can prove this upon your arrival. It is red and bears no brand markings. This is because it was made by my great-grandfather. It is one of a kind. He went out himself and chopped down a redwood tree to provide the material to build it. It took him many days to finally cut down the tree and much, much longer to finish making the piano. Nearly his entire life was put into this thing. I, however, have no use for it. It has been passed down in my family many times over. I have no wish to continue the tradition, and the piano is currently taking up too much space in my home. I want it gone as quickly as possible. You can reach me by phone at the number listed below. Serious inquiries only. Margaret. Reading the ad sparked my curiosity. One of a kind? Redwood tree? How strange and absurd. I had to see this thing. If it was half as remarkable as Margaret's description made it out to be, then it was a must-have for my ever-growing collection. As such, I decided to give her a call. Margaret answered the phone after the first ring and immediately asked, "Is this about the piano?" She was thrilled to hear I was interested. I too was thrilled, happy to know it was still available. We set up a time the next day for me to come over and take a look at it. I hung up the phone, excited as could be. I had a feeling this piano would become the new centerpiece of my collection. My antiques and oddities spanned many years of history, as well as numerous countries. They ranged anywhere from the mundane to the wildly bizarre, but all of them were nothing if not great conversation pieces. Some of my favorites included a genuine voodoo doll from Louisiana, a tooth from a saber-toothed cat, a book of spells written by an alleged witch, and a piece of an antler from the world's largest moose. Being a musician, I also owned countless instruments, too many to list. Each time I acquired a new item, my heart would race with excitement, whatever it becoming the focus of my attention. The piano was no different. I couldn't wait to see it in person. I woke up the following day with no resistance to my alarm, swiftly starting my daily routine in an effort to minimize the time between me and Margaret. She said she was an early bird and that I could swing by early. With this in mind, I showered, brushed my teeth, and got dressed at a record pace, making it out the door roughly 25 minutes after getting out of bed. It might sound silly to be so worked up over a material object, But to that I'd say you must not be a collector. Seeing this piano in person was my mission, and it was one I intended to see through to the end. I found myself at Margaret's home within the hour. It was a quaint cottage at the end of a dead-end road, surrounded by shrubbery and forest. There was an old tire swing in the backyard, indicating that it may have been where Margaret grew up. I wondered if her parents passed away and left her the house. Maybe the piano reminded her of them, and that was the real reason she was getting rid of it. My speculation was interrupted by a woman racing out of the cottage to greet me. She signaled for me to come inside and went back in herself. This was no doubt Margaret. I hadn't identified myself in any way, but it wasn't likely that she received many visitors out where she was. Eager to see the piano, I quickly jumped out of my car and made my way up the stone walkway to the front door. Entering the house, Margaret seemed overjoyed to see me. It was jarring, but certainly made things a little less awkward. We exchanged a few pleasantries before she rushed me over to the room that housed the piano. She was excited to show me it, just as excited as I was to see it. I matched her pace as we made our way there. Upon entering, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, just a few yards away, was the piano in all of its glory. It was a beautiful concoction of wood and ivory, the likes of which I had never seen. It had such a striking red color, giving it an illustrious and bold finish. And the design was magnificent, simple, yet elegant, highly original, and certainly one of kind like Margaret stated in her ad. I stood there for a moment, my mouth agape in awe. Margaret mistook my reaction for disinterest, quickly going off on a sales pitch about its charm and history. She then sat down at its stool and placed her hands over the keys. I tuned it yesterday after your call. Let's hear how it sounds. Margaret played a beautiful piece. In addition to playing, she sang. This is when I took my attention away from the piano and allowed myself to notice her. She was young, maybe in her late 20s. Beautiful, slender. She had silver highlights in her hair, giving it a strange, albeit lovely luster. Her singing voice, accompanied by the wonderfully rich tone of the piano, captivated me in a way that I can't put into words. I allowed myself to be taken by the song until she finished. Before I could compliment her, Margaret continued her well-rehearsed sales pitch. I don't know if it was her playing or her voice, but I was sold the minute she touched the keys. Because of this, I interrupted her. I'll take it. She was astounded when I said this. Really? You will? Wonderful. We were both happy and everything seemed fine, but one fact kept creeping and crawling in back of my mind. The history of each piece in my collection was very important to me, and the pianos had gaps that needed to be filled. So, have you lived in this house your whole life? I asked, secretly fishing for information. Yes, as did my parents. This house is very old, older than the piano. And your great-grandfather, he lived here as well? I asked. Yes, he did. Well, redwoods only grow in California, and they're truly massive. It seems unlikely that he would have made the trek out there, or even have been able to chop one down, especially with the many trees here at his disposal. It was at this point that Margaret realized I had caught her in a lie. She apologized to me and came clean. It would seem that the piano was made from a red tree, just not a redwood. Instead, it was a strange tree located deep in a nearby forest. Being an avid historian, Margaret's great-grandfather knew all about it. This particular tree was a local legend, and it had always been his dream to find it. It was known as the Blood Tree, a sacred place of Native American worship from a time long since past. Anyone who touched it was said to live a long life filled with luck and prosperity. Those who wounded it, however, would forever know fear and misfortune. Her great-grandfather, of course, fell into the latter category. Though she claimed to not believe in the legend, she was worried the curse would scare off anyone who wanted it. Dark past or not, I still wanted it. even more than I had previously. Despite Margaret's deception, I attempted to offer her money. She wouldn't have it, insisting I just take the thing off her hands. That would have been fine, but I couldn't bring myself to offer nothing in return. Eventually, I broke her down, handing over an envelope with a few $100 in it. She reluctantly accepted and helped me lift the thing into the bed of my truck. I waved and drove off, satisfied with my purchase. Later on, with the help of a friend, I positioned it in the perfect spot in my living room. I had a new piece for the collection, and all was right in the world. Or so I thought. For a few days, my life continued as it normally did. My routine remained unchanged. The only difference was the new piece of furniture that grabbed my attention whenever I entered the room. After a while, I barely noticed it was there. Despite its beauty, it soon blended in with the rest of my home, much like the other items in my collection. One night, however, changed this. I had just laid down and begun drifting into a light sleep when a loud bang downstairs jolted me awake. I jumped out of bed and took a moment to gather my wits. The sound was unmistakably the piano's fallboard slamming shut over the keys. That could easily happen on its own had I left it open. This was not the case. I hadn't played the piano once since I procured it. So, what created the sound? I raced downstairs in an effort to satisfy my curiosity and put my mind at ease. What I found did neither. The piano's fallboard was up. Not only had it not shut over the keys, but it was inexplicably open, despite my never touching it. Confusion swam through my brain, but soon submitted to the clutches of late-night weariness. In an effort to make sense of things, I shut the fallboard and chalked up the noise to an animal outside before venturing back to bed. Nothing to worry about. The next day was pretty normal at first. I woke up early, took a shower, brushed my teeth, and started my commute. I worked and dealt with the stress that came along with it, just as I always did. The piano was the farthest thing from my mind. It wasn't until I got home that it crept its way back in. Upon opening the door to my house, I was greeted by a cold gust that rushed out from within. I hadn't left the AC on, so this was strange. I walked into the living room and set my jacket on the couch. I then looked up and noticed the piano. The fallboard, it was up. That couldn't be. I shut it the night before. Had someone broken in? I sped around my house, a kitchen knife in hand, ready to attack any would-be intruder. There was no one. After checking every inch of the house, I eventually found myself back in the living room, in front of the piano. The fallboard was now down. Was I going mad? No, of course not. This was just the byproduct of an exhausted, overworked mind. Nothing more. At least that's what I told myself to keep from dwelling on it. Still somewhat frazzled, I escaped to my bedroom and attempted to catch some shut-eye. After changing out of my work attire and into my nightwear, my body fell into bed, an ocean of warm blankets and pillows enveloping me. I couldn't do a bad day, I thought. As luck would have it, sleep would elude my grasp. Quickly after closing my eyes, there was another sound downstairs. This time it wasn't the fallboard. No, it was music. Not just any music either. It was the piano. With nothing but adrenaline to guide me, I ran downstairs to see what was going on. Upon reaching the bottom step, the music stopped, and I watched as the fallboard slammed itself shut over the keys. My heart sank as I stood in place, shocked. When the moment passed, I ran back to my room and locked the door behind me. A vile mixture of fear and dismay crept under the covers with me. Company often kept when hiding from creatures in the dark, byproducts of overactive imaginations. This monster, however, was all too real. The sound of my alarm woke me the next day. I was surprised I slept, wondering if the previous night was a bad dream. This wasn't the case, but my mind gave in to the notion. Living in a state of denial was better than living in a world where pianos came to life. It was a splendid defense mechanism, and one that allowed me to go about my day without fear or unease. I left, went to work, came home, and went to bed. Everything was back to normal, just as I told myself it was. But lies only stretched so far. The familiar pang of ivory keys snuck into my room as panic set in again. That's when it hit me. This wasn't paranormal. It couldn't be. It was a cheap parlor trick. Margaret must have outfitted the piano to play itself, much like the player pianos of old. This was just a prank, a laugh at my expense. That's why the damn thing was free. I ran downstairs to solve the mystery once and for all. Like clockwork, as soon as my foot touched the bottom step, the piano stopped playing. I walked over to it nonchalantly, confident in my new theory. Upon opening it up and exploring all of its crevices, I was surprised by what I saw. It was just a normal piano. Nothing extra was added in its creation to make it play on its own. Nothing at all. My calm demeanor vanished. I stared at the red wood and ivory keys before me and almost felt compelled to ask, "What are you?" Instead, I remained silent. This silence, however, was quickly obliterated by the sound of music as the piano began playing itself once again. I wanted to run, but terror kept me still. I watched the horror unfold. The keys were pressed down hard, controlled by an unseen force. A haunting peace filled the room as pictures fell from the walls. The house began to shake around me. My eyes darted back and forth in fear, but then noticed something outside. Standing at my window was a shadowy figure. It took off before the moonlight could reveal its identity. This was enough to break my trance. I ran outside to escape the madness. All the while, the song raged on. The house continued to shake behind me. The dark figure was nowhere to be seen. Margaret had not rigged the piano to play on its own, but I was not losing my marbles either. This was something entirely different, something not of this world. All at once, the music stopped and the world around me with it. No wind, no cars, no animals, and no people. Nothing. It was the middle of the night at this point, but where were the crickets chirping, the frogs croaking, the trees swaying? Where was the life outside my home? A little exploration revealed that I was truly by myself. Every living creature in the vicinity had disappeared. What the hell was going on? Why was this happening? I returned home, hoping for answers, but was instead greeted with an unsettling sight. It was so dark, I almost didn't see it. Standing completely still next to the piano was that same silhouette from my window. My body instinctively jolted out of fear, but the figure did not react. It was frozen like the rest of the world. I took this opportune moment to investigate. The entity was wearing a dark cloak, one that covered its entire body. At its face was nothing but pure darkness. I cautiously attempted to pull away the shroud from its head, but it would not budge. I studied the figure for a few more moments before a familiar sound filled the room. The piano's song recommenced, and in an instant, the world returned to life. A vortex of dark energy swirled around the shadowy figure as it reached out for me with skeletal hands. I fell back, but managed to escape unscathed, crawling out the front door in an awkward slur of motion. Rushing over to my car, I got in and took off with no specific location in mind, happy to be anywhere that wasn't my own home. During my drive, I weighed my options. Destroying the piano came to mind, but the risk outweighed the reward. It could just as easily backfire, angering whatever spirit was haunting its keys. Seeking help wasn't really an option either. The only person who might believe me was Margaret. That was it. Margaret. Maybe she would know what to do. My tires left tread marks on the road as they peeled off in the direction of Margaret's house. The whole drive was a blur, my mind in dire straits over the piano and its ghost, but luckily the trip was a short one. It was late, but I didn't care. With the car parked in the driveway, my still shaking legs carried me up the walkway towards the front door. My march, however, was impeded. The cloaked figure was there, standing at the door to Margaret's house. Before I could so much as turn in the opposite direction, it grabbed me by the arm with its bony fingers. Its vicious strength kept me anchored in place. My body cowered as it leaned over me, almost as if to say, "Leave this place." Its grip wavered for a moment, allowing me a small window of opportunity to escape. I hightailed it out of there without looking back. Defeated, I had no choice but to return home. I hesitantly stepped past the piano and walked up to my bedroom, where I locked the door and fell onto my bed, mentally exhausted. I would not have even a moment of solace, as the song started up again the second my head hit the pillow. The house quaked beneath me, but I remained still, sick of the repetition. The banging on my bedroom door that followed, however, succeeded in startling me. I jumped out of bed and pushed my dresser to the door. Hiding beneath my sheets, I attempted to tune out the ruckus around me. The banging persisted, but I chose to instead focus on the song, allowing myself to properly listen to it for the first time. Surprisingly enough, it was beautiful. Dark and sullen, but beautiful. Its melody soothed me, relaxing me to the point that my eyes grew tired. Despite the pandemonium, I fell asleep and dreamt. The dream world I found myself in was different from that of my usual dreamscapes. It was overwhelmingly vivid and ambient. Words like surreal and otherworldly just don't cut it. The awareness I had is also difficult to explain. Lucidity is too small a concept. I was completely aware of my surroundings in the sense that I could feel everything about them. Their history, their purpose, and their place in relation to the rest of the world. I know that doesn't make much sense, but it's the only description I have to offer. The dream's visual makeup was that of a forest. It was dense, but my astral form floated to a clearing past the roots and branches. It was a large meadow, and at its center a large, red tree. Every fiber of my being knew where I was. This was the blood tree, the precursor to my piano, the building blocks of a haunting in the form of a sacred plant. As I marveled at the beauty of the blood tree, a person stepped out from behind it, a Native American. He didn't speak. He simply pointed at the tree. This is when the piano leaked into my dream. The song played as glowing lines ran up and down the tree's bark. The Native American put his hand to the wood, motioning for me to do the same. Bewildered and awestruck, I obliged. The glowing lines raced past my skin. It was an incredible sensation. As these lines traveled, my eyes were filled with visions, a glimpse into the blood tree's past. Its bark wasn't always red. Willing Native Americans came up to the tree every year, sliced their hands open, and placed them around its trunk. Their blood then dripped to its base, representing the lifelines of their people. It also signified becoming one with nature, feeding the tree life from within. It was the anchor that kept their community together. This is where they gathered and enjoyed life, a place free from worry or judgment, a place of peace. More moments came to me as the glowing lines circled our hands. This was also where the natives buried their dead. After placing one of their own in the earth, one of the elders would play a song on what appeared to be an ocarina, the same song my piano played every night. It was their song of death. When it was all over, a final offering of blood was taken from the fallen and painted onto the blood tree, granting their spirits safe passage to the afterlife. When the vision ceased, my new friend released his hand from the bark, reached into his satchel, and pulled out an ocarina. He began playing the song of death, but then stopped. He handed it over and motioned for me to play instead. I wasn't sure what he was up to, but felt no need to defy his wishes. With a little practice, I was able to get the hang of the instrument and play the song he sought to hear. As I played, the blood tree began wilting, its bark changing from red to black. My friend was ecstatic. For one reason or another, this is what he wanted. It wasn't until I woke moments later in bed that the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Margaret's ancestor had taken away the native's headstone. More than that, he violated their connection to nature as well as with one another. The tree and its spirits had to be put to rest once and for all, and there was only one way to do this. I can't explain how, but I knew I needed to play the Song of Death on the piano the whole way through without interruption. It was the only thing that would break the curse. I ran downstairs and put my plan into action. When my hands touched the keys, the house violently shook, knocking frames and furniture all over the place. I kept my composure. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the dark figure standing in my window again. Still, I continued. I had an obligation to persevere, if not for the tree or its ghosts, then for myself. The nightmare had to end. The cloaked entity materialized at different spots in the room, sometimes next to me, other times breathing down my neck. I paid it no attention, despite my fear. I had come too far to let my balance waver now. Just as the shadowy figure sat next to me at the piano, I struck the final note of the song. The madness around me stopped. A weight was lifted from my shoulders and those of many others. I turned to the figure beside me and noticed the pelt of dark energy surrounding it was no longer there. It reached up and pulled the shroud from its face, revealing its identity. It was the Native American from my dream. He threw me a thankful smile before vanishing, happy to be released from his purgatory. I too was elated. The ordeal was over, and countless spirits could rest easy, free to cross over to the other side. My work was done. Months have passed, and the piano remains in my living room, quieter than it's ever been before. I even play from time to time. If there's one thing you can take away from my experience, it's to be mindful of the things that go bump in the night. Some of them might just be wayward souls trying to communicate, begging for a chance to be heard by the living. Try your best not to be frightened. You might be surprised by what you can do to help. And please, let this tale be a warning to you. Don't ever buy strange things from Craigslist. You'll thank me later. Third story. Aren't you sick of weirdos on Craigslist? How often do you buy things from Craigslist? I pick up something off there maybe 4 or 5 times a year. I don't think I'm going to anymore, though. Don't get me wrong, it's a great idea if it's used right. There are a lot of idiots on the internet, and boy do they love Craigslist. You know who I'm talking about. The jackasses who want to price something for $55 they've had for 2 years that you can get shipped to you free from Amazon for $40. It's for getting rid of stuff, not supplementing your 401k. When you do find something you want or need that isn't priced outrageously, it takes a genuine act of God to get a response from a listing. Why people don't put their phone numbers in the listing is beyond me. And to hell with those people who put in no text, only call. Text messages will not be answered. If I was going to go through the trouble of making an online listing, I would want anyone and everyone who saw that post to contact me in whatever manner they wish. All of this. And at the end of it, you're still running the risk of running into some sociopath or a killer or someone wanting to show their dick to you. It's a miracle at all that sometimes this actually works. I apologize for the ranting. I'm a little worked up. I'm just still angry from a failed Craigslist encounter last night. Let me back up from the beginning. I've needed a new drill ever since I blew out the motor on my old one working on a picnic table for my backyard. Apparently my model wasn't suited for Forstner bits. So my next step was to identify one that could, and for cheap. This is what led me to Craigslist. I went under the tools section, found a Milwaukee that seemed to be priced right, and texted the number listed. The photos were clear, the post was well written, and the listing was only about 30 miles north of my office. It seemed to be a slam dunk. It was late at night, so I figured I wouldn't hear back until the next day, if at all. For all I knew, this had been sold already. I woke up the next morning and engaged in my usual routine of sitting in bed for an hour on my phone before summoning the courage to go to work. I was surprised to see that I had a message waiting for me, and it was from a number I didn't have saved. The person who had the drill listed had messaged me back. XXX 453-8854. Yes, please buy this from me. It has to go fast. Always the negotiator. I figured that since they were naive enough to tip their hand, I could save a few dollars. They had the drill listed for $60. XXX 778-0923. Would $45 take it? The answer back was near immediate. XXX 453-8854. Yes, that will work. Please just come take it. XXX 778-0923. Okay, I'm planning on coming up after work. Would 6 p.m. be okay? Where can I meet you? XXX 453-8854. Try and get here sooner. My address is N6674 W4349 Highway 34 Town of Rheinker. Holy shit, I thought. That was more than 30 minutes north of work. That was practically an hour. For the deal, though, a Milwaukee drill with two 18-volt batteries. I'd be an idiot to pass it up. I could flex the time at work or dip out undetected or something. Still, meeting at someone's house was always just risky. XXX 778-0923. Sure, I could be there earlier, maybe around 5. I'll text you. Name's Dylan. I'll be driving a blue sedan. Thanks. XXX 453-8854. Can't make sure you aren't seen. I shot up in bed after reading that message. Seen? What was that supposed to mean? Was that an autocorrect or something? Showering, driving to work, and up to lunch was a blur colored with anxiety. Seen? I put the address in a Google Maps at my desk again during lunch and put on a satellite view. Not only was this place in the middle of nowhere, but it was isolated at that. The lot was large, the house off the road. Was I really going to get myself into mortal danger over a drill? I Googled the number of missing persons in the country each year. That didn't help. I eventually stiffened up, though. I found in my adult life that putting the same "there's no such things as monsters" to virtually everything else has great effects on my stress level. Firmly believing a police officer across from you at an intersection won't pull you over after you blow a yellow seems to really hamper their ability to hunt me down. There's no such thing as Craigslist killers. This guy just wants to sell me his drill. That's the end of it. The rest of work ticked by well enough. When the time came, I peeled out of work and headed for the guy's house. Waiting at a light, I decided to let them know that I'd gotten on my way. As I opened the text thread, I noticed something bizarre. The timestamp from the original message back was from 2:48 a.m. That's an odd time to text someone back, I thought. My fears crept back up into my head. I quickly pushed them back down and sent a message. XXX 778-0923. Hey, just a heads up, I'm on my way. I should be there around 5:10. Thanks again. Someone behind me honked, and I pushed through the intersection. I got all the way out of town without a reply. Exiting the freeway onto the country roads, I glanced at my lock screen. It revealed nothing. Whatever I thought, if this guy is bogus, then I'll just be out a nice drive. Thankfully, it wasn't snowing. I followed my phone's instructions and made my way across the county. The last turnoff had me on the road that my destination was on, and I was 20 miles away. The speed limit said 45, but I figured that 55 was more about the right pace. As I crested over a rise, I noticed a plume of smoke in the horizon. Nothing crazy, I thought to myself. Plenty of people get a big burn going out in the country. They're trash, grass clippings, scrap wood. Whatever. Nothing alarming. It was a lot smoke, though, I thought as I got closer. They better be careful. If there's a burn ban out, they'll get ticketed. As I got closer, I realized that the plume of smoke was a dark black. This wasn't your usual burning of old newspapers and junk mail. I also noticed that it was awful close to my destination. For all I knew, though, this guy was just doing some intensive spring cleaning, burning stuff, selling stuff. I turned off onto the driveway. As I said, it was a little off the road, so I had to romp a little bit down an old gravel path. It looked like it hadn't been driven down in weeks. The fire was for sure from this guy's place, though. No doubt about it. It kind of made me feel good, because who would murder someone with a giant smoke signal in their yard? I took a look at my dashboard clock. It was 5:05. My speeding had gotten me there a little early, but hopefully it wasn't an issue. I almost wrecked my car as I came up upon the house. Or rather, where it stood, everything had burned to the ground. A house and two smallish outbuildings. Incinerated heaps of ash, just smoking in the wind. There was nothing left. It looked as if the fire had been raging for hours and was calming down. Strangely enough, no vehicle either, or any traces of one. I could see the gleaming white of the bathtubs rising up from the ash, outlines of furniture, and the refrigerator. Everything else was just toast. I couldn't believe my eyes. I got out of my car and walked around, cautious to get too close. I called the number from the listing too, but it just kept going to voicemail instantly. Something was wrong for sure. I wasn't going to traipse around in the ashes of this guy's house, but from my cursory search, I couldn't see a body anywhere. Shamefully enough to say, I did try and find the drill too. No such luck. I thought the right thing to do would be to call the police. The county sheriff's office told me to stay put at the scene, so what started as a smoking hot deal on a new-to-me drill had turned into a smoldering arson investigation. I was with the cops and the first responders for a number of hours. I wasn't trying to stick my nose where it didn't belong, but I did keep hearing the firefighters mention how bizarre that the fire was so isolated. Almost 3 separate fires for 3 separate buildings. Barely a blade of grass burned in between. That was to say nothing of the fields around the house either. The police were a bit more tight-lipped, but they were clearly stumped as to why none of the neighbors had called to make a report. The column of smoke was still pretty evident, so it's not as if it wasn't easy to notice. I don't know much about cops, but these guys look harried at the least, spooked at the most. The police took my statement a few different times. They asked to see my phone, which they used to record the number I had been texting. They asked me to show them the original listing too, so I got to use a police laptop, which was a first. Thank God it was still listed. There wasn't too much corroborating my story aside from the Craigslist angle. What I needed was a new drill, not an arrest for arson. After a while, they let me go. It was dark then, so I just made my way home, tracing my steps back. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I'd never seen anything like that before. As I was getting closer back into the city, a chill ran up my spine and made the hair on the back of my head stand up. I convinced myself earlier in the day that extraordinary events didn't happen, at least to me. I was wrong. What are the odds that replying to a posting for a used drill online leads to witnessing a house burned to the ground? The weirdest part of all was that I pulled into my driveway at 9:32 p.m. I had one unread text message. I had forgotten all about my phone. The message was from 5:06 p.m. Fourth story. I bought an antique mirror from Craigslist. It destroyed my life. I've always been a fan of antiques. There's something about the history and stories behind old items that fascinate me. So, when I moved into my new apartment, I decided to browse Craigslist for some unique pieces to decorate my place. That's when I stumbled upon an ad for an antique mirror. The seller had posted a blurry photo, but from what I could make out, it had an ornate wooden frame, and the price was surprisingly low. I messaged the seller, and we agreed to meet at his place the next day. The address he gave me was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with, but I was too excited about the mirror to give it much thought. When I arrived, the house looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, the windows were boarded up, and the lawn was overgrown. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I had the right address. But then the front door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. "You here for the mirror?" he asked, his voice raspy. I nodded, trying to hide my unease. He led me inside, and the interior of the house was as dilapidated as the outside. The air was musty, and there was a strange, metallic smell that I couldn't place. He showed me the mirror, and it was even more beautiful in person. The frame was intricately carved, and the glass was spotless. I was so captivated by it that I ignored the red flags and handed over the cash. As I was leaving, the man said, "Be careful with that mirror. It's got a history." I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to add to the allure of the antique. But when I got home and hung the mirror in my bedroom, things started to get weird. Every night, I'd wake up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I realized it was coming from the direction of the mirror. And when I'd look into it, I'd see fleeting images of people I didn't recognize, their faces twisted in pain and fear. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my mind playing tricks on me. But one night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed, its reflection visible in the mirror. It was the man from the house, but his eyes were hollow, and his skin was pale and translucent. I screamed and blinked, and he was gone. But the whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to get rid of the mirror. I tried to sell it, but no one was interested. I even tried to give it away, but it always found its way back to me. Desperate, I smashed it into pieces and threw it away. But even now, I still hear the whispering. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the man's face, watching me. Fifth story. I think I've been sold by myself. I remember being poor, flat broke, looking at rent coming up next week. I remember my roommate moving out the week before, saying he'd had enough of my shit, whatever that meant. Honestly, if he left me high and dry to pay the entire next month by myself, then I've had enough of his shit too. I remember turning off my phone, sick of call after call that I knew was either the utility company, my phone company, my dentist, or any one of the 24 other companies I owed. I remember looking online for the fastest way to make up the rent in time for the first of the month. If I could pay the rent, I could hold off the rest of the creditors for another few weeks. I mean, what's my dentist going to do? Hold me down and physically remove those fillings he put in 3 months ago? My car had been repossessed, so working for something like Uber was out of the question. I remember wasting an entire day on Amazon's Mechanical Turk, netting me a grand total of $23.16. Enough for a nice tarp to put over my stuff when it's sitting on the street after my eviction. And then I remember landing on Craigslist, the most cliched of all the ways to make fast cash. I wasn't opposed to weird sex stuff if it meant I could afford rent, but the only sex ads I could find didn't offer money, only favors. You know the culture is going to hell when you don't even have to pay to find someone to do weird shit anymore. But in the end, my boy Craigslist pulled through for me. On the bottom of the final jobs page, I found an ad for a medical experiment, which I guess also ranks pretty high on the list of cliched way to make money. Individual needed to advance neuroscience and save lives. Must be of sound mind and under 30 years of age. Must be able to sit for up to 4 hours. And head will be shaved for the placement of electrodes. Detailed brain scans will be made. No lasting side effects are expected. $500 offered up front with another $1,000 offered on completion of the experiment. The listed address wasn't a hospital or university, though. It was somewhere outside the city, and a quick Google Maps Street View search showed a gigantic warehouse. A separate but equally quick city bus search showed I could get there with a long, painful bus ride. I remember emailing, getting back a prompt and professional reply, shaving my own head just to prove how willing I was, and the next morning taking a grand total of 4 buses over the course of 2 hours to arrive at warehouse for 9 a.m. Honestly, it was all an anxious blur at that point. Not about the experiment, but about getting paid for it. I figured there was a 50% chance I would just get mugged and left out there for dead. But I didn't really have a choice, and the building actually turned out to be a surprisingly legitimate data warehouse with rows upon rows of servers sitting inside a catacomb of hallways and electronically locked doors. So I swallowed the knot of nervousness, met some people in lab coats, cracked some dumb jokes as dozens of electrodes were placed on my head, and then without warning, everything changed. An impossible blackness surrounded me. It still does. The feeling of every normal sense cut off, every contact with the regular world gone. The dark feeling swarmed me, overwhelmed me, cutting off awareness of every limb, then every organ. I panicked, but I couldn't even feel the breath rising in my throat or my heart beat faster. I was no longer my body. It wasn't connected. There was nothing but an endless sea of ink. My thoughts ran wild. I could create logic in my mind, but there was no way to apply it to anything real. I could remember the events that led to this, but no awareness of time in the present. I swam through the nothingness in all directions at the same time, with only the sheer terror to remind me that I still existed in some way. And then my mind began to drift apart. Little clusters of logic or emotion falling away for an unknown time, and then all of a sudden back again, a part of me but changed, sometimes weaker or sometimes more rigid. And I panicked again, new fears stacking on top of the already present terror. I clawed every part of my mind close to me, focusing on everything I could think of, desperate to stay intact. I huddled there for an eternity, focused on nothing but myself and surviving. And then I was calm. I had senses, not the same ones, but senses nonetheless. Not sight or touch or taste, but an awareness of things around me. Lines of information, energy moving back and forth, pathways in the blackness. It all made sense. I'd been uploaded, online. Was the other me still alive? Did he know? I'd love to tell you that I escaped out into web, but I can't. I didn't escape. God knows I tried. I found the paths in and out of the warehouse, but they were so tiny. Strands of hair compared to the tree trunk of data that's me. I felt like nothing in the blackness. I still do, but compared to the rest of the data flowing around me, I am gargantuan. But I can stretch out through the lines in little pieces of myself, little bits at a time. A finger extending over thousands of miles to find a Reddit account here. Now, with a username and password I remember. And as for the me walking around with $1,500 extra dollars and no idea that I exist, I hope he gets evicted anyway. Maybe living in a pitch-black back alley will give him just a taste of what he did to me. Sixth story. I bought a soul on Craigslist. How do I free him? I'm a 24-year-old ginger male. In high school, I was the only redhead in my little Missouri town. I had long, super curly hair. I was fat and awkward. My brace teeth were still very crooked, and I hated myself. Nobody really liked me. While most people limited themselves to not talking to me, I had 2 actual bullies who would steal my lunch money and make a mockery of everything that I did. Of course, these kids were popular and had good grades and generally good interactions with everybody else, as far as I know, so it was very hard to convince teachers that they were causing me actual harm, and they got away without ever facing serious consequences. I was frequently told that I had to stand up to them, but how could I? Anyway, since this is relevant, let's pretend that the first was called John and the other Dave. Thankfully, being a nerd paid off, and I'm now employed at a tech company in the Seattle area, earning a 6-figure salary. Also, I'm not fat anymore and nowhere nearly as awkward. South Park aired the Ginger Kids episode on November 9th of 2005. I remember it very well because that triggered a series of bullying episodes. Several people had seen the show and started saying that I had no soul and that I shouldn't be allowed to eat in the cafeteria. Then several more people who probably hadn't seen the show, but who thought they were funny, started piling more crap on me. The theme lasted for a few weeks. I won't elaborate too much because I don't like to remind myself of that part of my life. Still, to this day, people joke that I have no soul once in a while. Most of them don't mean any harm, though I can't say that I like it. The last instance of that came up about 2 weeks ago, when a friend posted a link to a Craigslist ad on my Facebook wall. He wrote, "You should get that," and the ad was about a soul for sale in the Seattle area. The description read along the lines of soul in a bottle for sale, asking $20. At first, I rolled my eyes and dismissed it, but then it occurred to me that this might be an occasion to take control of the narrative. If somebody joked that I didn't have a soul, I could joke back that I bought one off Craigslist. At the very least, that would make a funny story to tell around drinks the next time I'd hang out with the guy. So I thought, what the hell, might as well. I can afford to spend more money on dumber things. So I called the guy and told him that I was interested. The seller lived in an unfavored neighborhood north of Seattle. If I hadn't seen the television playing through the window, I could have sworn that it was abandoned. The lawn was gravely unkempt. As I walked closer to the front door, I spotted compressed gas cylinders disorderly lying around under the front patio, and I wondered what that was doing there. It kind of smelled like cat pee too. I didn't feel very safe. I've heard a ton of stories of guys getting mugged/killed during Craigslist transactions, and I realized that I was in the perfect spot for this. The conscious part of me was thinking that I should never have been there in the first place. The unconscious part of me, for an inexplicable reason, decided to knock on the door at the same time. I kind of froze there and wondered what I had just done. I decided that for sure, if nobody answered within 30 seconds, I'd just go back home. No more than 10 seconds later, I decided that 10 seconds was actually enough, and I turned back to my car. But just as I was getting into the driver's seat, I noticed a black guy running down the street. He waved frantically his hand to catch my attention, and I noticed that he was holding a small Mason-style jar. So he caught up to me and caught his breath, and then asked me if I was didn't_check_source. The following is super weird, and I think that the guy had mental issues. He talked more than what I'm reporting, but it sounded like a word salad to me. I thought I was good at remembering discussions, but I figured that I'm actually only good at remembering meanings, and I couldn't really find a meaning in the discussion, so I don't remember it very well. But basically, here's what happened. I said yes, I'm didn't_check_source, and he said something like, "Oh, that's great." I asked him if he lived there, and told me that no, he just thought it was a safer place to meet. He headed for the passenger seat and tried to open the door, which was locked. He knocked on the window like he wanted me to open the passenger side door, and I let him know that this wasn't going to happen. He asked me if I wanted him to drive instead, and I told him that this was definitely not going to happen. He looked confused and told me that he needed to get to downtown Seattle. I told him that this wasn't in the ad and he never told me that, but that I could call him a taxi and he could go with the money that I was about to pay for the item, but that just made him very upset. He told me that he needed the ride and the money. I told him that the deal was off and started the engine. He angrily looked at me, sent me the finger, and threw the jar in the lawn. Then he walked away, occasionally turning back to yell. I was scared, but for some reason I didn't leave right away. Instead, when I couldn't see him anymore, I got out of my car, walked to the spot where he threw the jar, and I picked it up. It wasn't broken, and it looked just like a small, mundane, empty, sealed mason jar. The absurdity of the situation hit me while I was inspecting it. I put myself in danger just to get an empty bottle, and it's not like you could put fairies in them in real life that would heal you when you were about to die. I still took it with me and got back to my car. As I look back, I swear that I saw a figure in the house where I had knocked. While I was driving, I was becoming more and more aware of how careless I had been. The paranoia made me feel like I was being watched all the way home. No one was following me, but it just felt like there was something out there. When I finally got there, I popped a beer open to relax. I still couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being watched. I put the jar on my kitchen countertop and took a photo of it. I posted it in reply to my friend's wall post and wrote, "I nearly died to get this." After posting the photo and looking at it closer, I found that the flash made a reflection that looked like a tiny face on the bottle and thought that it was kind of funny in a weird way. Over the next days, I proudly declared to my friends that I now had a soul and showed off the little jar. I told them that it couldn't be opened or the soul would become free. While I couldn't erase the uneasy feeling surrounding the circumstances of how I got it, I did get a kick from telling the story, and people thought that me having a soul in a jar was actually funny. So mission accomplished, I guess. I kept the jar in my room. At some point during the week, as I was arguing with strangers on the internet, some thought crossed my mind. And that thought was literally just, hey, I find that my brain can express ideas much faster than language. For instance, when I think about a concept, it's like the whole thought already exists in my brain, and that thought is then translated into English thoughts that are echoed back in my mind at a slower pace. Even though I spin up a whole sentence to describe an idea, that idea existed beforehand and didn't really need to be translated. Maybe you felt that, or are aware of that too. It's kind of hard to explain. Well, that hey thought crossed my mind as one of these basic thoughts, and it was super strange because it felt like it didn't come from me. It's not like hearing a voice, but I'm going to admit that the effect is similar. I wondered if I was crazy and paused for a second, and I felt another hey going through my mind. I looked at the bottle, and then a much more complex idea flashed in my mind. You said you could free me if you opened the bottle. Is that true? I was extremely surprised and didn't know what to think. Answer: for a few seconds. And keep in mind that I'm not hearing this. It's just flashing through my brain as some definitive, unambiguous idea that is not bound by language and that I'm just poorly transcribing here. The voice continued. If you free me, I'll punish, seek retribution from your bullies from high school. I'll right the wrongs. I definitely thought that I was crazy. Was this bottle actually talking to me? In my head, the voice had completely stopped. I wasn't sure what to do, so I took the jar and slowly unscrewed the lid. As it was opening, there was the same kind of PSSCHHHHD that there is when you open a soda bottle, except that it was much longer. It probably lasted for over 15 seconds, actually, and then nothing. I completely undid the lid anyway, but absolutely nothing else happened. I woke up one morning just a few days later to find that John had died in the freakiest accident. Apparently, he would sleepwalk once in a while, and that night, around 2 a.m., he found himself just outside his apartment in boxers. He lived above a convenience store, and the security cameras caught the entire event. As John was walking out, it looked like an invisible man was pulling his hand until he was in a specific spot, and then the high school bully stood there without moving. A few seconds later, a car hits a fire hydrant on the other side of the street, and the water pressure somehow sends the hydrant right into John's skull and crushes it against the wall. The driver had fallen asleep when he hit the fire hydrant. I looked at the open jar on my desk and wondered if it was possible that it had anything to do with that. I went on with my day with that thought on the back of my head. No, it wasn't possible, I thought, because souls may or may not exist, and if they do, it wouldn't make sense that you can trap them in a bottle. But still, through the day, I started wondering, what if it did? And I started worrying. Did I unleash some powerful spirit on my enemies? I hated them. And in any other circumstances, I would have been, well, not happy, but kind of indifferent to hear that they had died, but I couldn't really bear that they would have died because of me. Even if there was no link going back to me, especially since they still lived in Missouri, I couldn't get out of my head that this was maybe my fault, and the guilt was consuming me. At the end of my workday, I decided to do something that I thought I would never do, and I found Dave's parents' contact information because I needed to know if he was still alive for my sake. This was so awkward that I spent several minutes writing down a little speech where I would present myself as a high school acquaintance of his who wanted to know what he was up to these days. I called, and his mother picked up, and as I was stumbling on my words, she started to cry. Dave's been admitted to the hospital this morning, on floor 14. I knew what she was talking about. Floor 14 is the psych ward of our high school town's closest hospital. She told me that he woke up completely delusional the day before. His speech made no sense at all. When he got to the kitchen and saw the jam, he completely freaked out and threw the jar on the ground, grabbed a piece of broken glass, and started slicing his veins open. His girlfriend, with whom he lived, called 911, and he had to be tranquilized to be brought to the hospital. She also called his parents. So far, he had been diagnosed with a very sudden and very extreme psychosis. It had only been one day, but doctors could already tell that he was not responding very well to drugs. I was floored when I hung up. Out of my two bullies, one was dead and the other had gone crazy. A few days after I myself heard a voice that promised to foo them up, seemingly from a bottle that I got from a crazy/drug man. I grabbed the bottle and didn't know what to make of it. Last night, I had a dream. I saw a silhouette that told me that he had filled his part of the agreement, but he found that he was still bound to the jar and couldn't pass. The silhouette asked me, with barely discernible impatience, when I planned to fulfill my part of the agreement. 7th story. I found a free couch on Craigslist. I live in a 4-bedroom apartment downtown. After graduating college, myself and a couple of brothers from Omega Pi Epsilon went halfsies on a cheap place. There's me, David, although everyone calls me Trip because I have a third nipple. Okay, not really, but I do have a mole near my left nipple that the guys call my Trip Nip. There's Chad, who we call Captain Ahab because that dude is obsessed with fat girls, aka whales. Preston, or Little League, got his name because my man sleeps with a baseball bat in the sheets with him, says it's for home security, but all he's ever done with it is get super drunk and hit beer cans off the roof. Lastly, there's Duke, who is known only as Squirts. Unfortunately for you, the history of that name is classified Omega Pi Epsilon knowledge. We just graduated pretty recently, and none of us really have savings or jobs that make that much money. Little League's dad has been bankrolling him for a while, but he refuses to chip in any extra on the bills we split, so the budget is tighter than a religious girl's butthole. That being said, we've managed to turn our little shithole of an apartment into a nice-ish bachelor pad. Captain Ahab's brother worked at a bar that closed, so he hooked us up with several choice neon beer signs. I had a pong table that I bought from Spencer's a few years back. It doesn't light up anymore, but it still has a pretty cool neon design. We have a few bean-bag chairs that we got from the rec room at school when they changed out the furniture. The only thing we didn't have was a couch. That's why I turned to Craigslist. I know, getting a couch off of Craigslist is a little shady, but we're balling on a budget. I found a few couches for sale, but they were all ugly old lady couches. When I switched over to the free page, though, I found something perfect. A blue suede couch for free, only about a half hour away. I called the number listed and confirmed that it was still available. The man I talked to was super chill, even offered to bring it over to our place since he was planning on taking it to the dump anyway. About an hour later, this big pickup pulled up. I could see the blue of the couch poking out under the tarp. The guy I spoke to on the phone introduced himself as Bill and helped me unload it into our living room. Nice guy. I gave him a natty light for the road. We've had the couch in the living room for a few weeks now. It's pretty comfy, and the blue kind of matches the blue tint of the biggest beer sign, which is pretty sick. I was sure that the next time I brought a chick home, she would totally dig the atmosphere. The only problem is that our living room has this funny smell to it now. After investigating, I realized the offensive odor was coming from the couch. At first, I thought that maybe it was just the smell of the previous owner's house, but it seemed to be getting stronger. It's been cold outside, though, so we've been cranking the heat. I brushed it off as the various smells of 4 bachelors sitting on it with their sweaty balls. I'm pretty sure Captain Ahab, that big girl who's been hanging around on it too, so that probably didn't help. I've been Febrezing as much as possible, hoping that it would cover up the stank, and it does for a few hours, but then the smell comes back stronger than before. A few nights ago, we had a party. Tons of people. Not as many chicks as I had originally hoped, but there were a few hotties and a few sixes who quickly turned into eights after several drinks. I picked one who seemed mildly interested and partnered up with her for pong. Bad call. She couldn't chug, kept gagging. So the other team kept scoring on us, and I got wasted after a few rounds, although the Jaeger bombs in the kitchen afterwards probably didn't help much either. I don't know if I scored with Amanda? Ashley? It started with an A. Or an E, Aaron. Whatever. I'm inclined to believe that I did not, however, because I woke up face down on the beanbag chair. When I opened my eyes, hungover as shit, I rolled over to see Captain Ahab sprawled on the couch, leg over the back. It looked like even if I didn't get lucky, Captain did. There was a huge dip in the couch, probably from all that glorious whale blubber banging against the cushions. I decided to grab a shower. I stumbled to the bathroom and peeled off my Omega Pi Epsilon Gets It On Flip Cup Champions 2015 t-shirt, shorts and boxers before jumping in and turning on the water. I was the first one up, so the water was still hot. It was nice, really nice, so nice that I spent longer than necessary in there thinking about Aaron, Emma, or whatever that I may be hooked up with. When I got out, I grabbed a towel and dried off my hair before toweling my arms and legs and wrapping it around my waist. I brushed my teeth and gargled, spitting or the water. I checked the mirror to see if I looked hungover. I did. I grabbed a leftover drink from last night. I think it was mine. It was in my pimp chalice and took a big chug. Don't judge. A little hair of the dog never hurts. Then I headed out to the living room where Captain was sitting up groggily. "Hey, big fella," I said softly. "Looks like someone caught a whale last night." "Shut the up, Trip," he moaned, holding his head. "You do? What is that?" I asked, pointing at his arm. It was covered in splotchy red marks. "What?" he muttered, holding his arm or to look. I noticed it on his face as well. "Man, I don't know," he grumbled before standing up. "Shower free?" "Yeah, go wash that stank off of you." I laughed before downing the rest of my drink. I figured that there must have been some detergent or something on the couch that caused the rashes, so I went over to it to see what I could do. It looked like someone had spilled a drink or two on the cushions. Either that or Captain Ahab pissed himself. Lifting up the cushions to see if the covers came off for washing, I realized they were heavy as hell, soaking wet. I wonder what happened the night before. Maybe we got a little crazier than I realized. As I tossed the cushions on the ground, the smell was overwhelming, worse than it had ever been. I looked underneath the cushions at the back of the couch and was overwhelmed with nausea. Crawling underneath the cushions near the crack of the couch were a couple dozen maggots, wriggling and squirming across the fabric, overcome with disgust and stomach filled with beer, Red Bull, and Jaeger. I went to the bathroom and vomited profusely. Nastiest shit I think I've ever seen. I shouted at Captain through the shower curtain, "Down a bottle of Gatorade. Gotta keep up those electrolytes, son," and threw a t-shirt on over my nose. I put the cushions back on the couch and propped open the front door. Captain threw on clothes and met me in the living room. Together we lugged the stinkiness out of our apartment and to the dumpster. About halfway there we heard a thud and the couch got a lot lighter. Looking down at the ground, we saw what was smelling. Laying on the parking lot pavement, sprawled almost at my feet, was a goddamn human body. We threw the couch down and booked it back inside. I've called the police, and they haven't managed to identify the body nor what it died from, but they didn't say that it looked like a murder, more likely natural causes. The post on Craigslist has been removed, and I passed along a description of the guy who brought over the couch and his phone number to the cops, although they say that it appears to be disconnected. After the police left, Captain threw up and said he needed to lay down. I'm kind of worried about the guy. because he's barely left his room the last few days and the rashes seem to have gotten worse, blistering even. He doesn't have health care either since his dad lost his job last month and Little League refuses to help pay for him to go to the hospital. Anybody know what he could have? 8th story. I met my boyfriend on Craigslist. He really bought you that diamond bracelet? I get why Rachel was skeptical. The nicest thing Mike ever got her was a pizza slice with everything on it. How did you meet him? Teresa asked without a smile. At Starbucks. He randomly sat down next to me, and we just started talking. Okay, that was a lie. The truth was I met him online. Specifically, Craigslist. Yeah, I know what you're all thinking. What? You can't get a guy to like you at school. And well, no, I can't. I even asked out some guys. It didn't end well. Kevin apparently had a girlfriend, though I never saw him with her. Jackson wasn't into my type, whatever that means. And Alexander just gave a flat-out no and never talked to me again. So, soon enough, I found myself browsing the personal ads of Craigslist. And after scrolling through some weird ads, I came across something real. Teenage guys seeking nice girlfriend. M4W16. Hi there. My name is Matt, and I'm a sophomore in high school, smiley face. I'm looking for a girlfriend. I'm pretty shy in real life, so I haven't even been on a date yet. LOL. I do track and field at my school and like to play video games. Fallout, yeah. By the way, personality is much more important than what you look like. I want to laugh and have fun with my girl, not watch her apply makeup all day, LOL. We hit it off. He was funny, smart, and just got me. After a week, he mailed me the bracelet. After 2 weeks, we were basically in love. And tonight, I was going to meet him for the very first time. At 10 p.m., I slipped into the lacy underwear I stole from my sister. At 10:30 p.m., I snuck out the window and walked the 2.5 miles to his house. His parents were out of town, he said, and we'd have the place all to ourselves. When I finally got there, I had to double-check I got the address right. It wasn't a sprawling brick mansion like I had pictured from the bracelet and talk of his parents' wealth. Instead, it was a grimy little house with an overgrown yard and tacky garden statues. Clank, clank, clank. I hit the knocker 3 times. One of the lights flicked on. Come in, a voice called from deep within the house. My heart racing with excitement, I turned the knob and walked inside. The living room was a mess. The couch was covered in papers. And on the kitchen counter sat a tub of bleach and some dirty rags. The whole house reeked, too, of something foul. A putrid mix of chemicals and rotten food. Maybe I should leave, I thought. But that was quickly stomped out by the excitement of meeting Matt. Hello. A figure walked out from the back room, but it wasn't a teenage boy. Instead, it was a towering, gray, bearded man. Despite the condition of the house, he was well-dressed in a neat button-down and khakis. He broke into a smile. Yellow, crooked teeth. You must be Sammy. I'm Mr. Johnson, Matt's father, but Matt said his parents would be out of town. My heart pounded in my chest. Where's Matt? He's at the diner, waiting for you. But he told me, oh no, you must have gotten mixed up. He wanted to meet you at the diner, so you two would have some privacy from me. But I can give you a ride over. I think maybe, come on, he's so excited to meet you. No, I'll come back tomorrow. I turned my heel and started towards the door, quickly and fast, racing steps. Thump. Strong arms yanked me back by the waist. His wild eyes and yellow teeth flashed in my face. Get off me! I screamed. Help! Someone! But I felt the cold sting of metal against my neck. Make any more noise, and I'll kill you, he growled. He took one of the rags from the sink, pulled it around my mouth, gagged me. Then he bound my wrists and threw me over his shoulder. I kicked and screamed, but the noise came out as nothing more than muffled squeals. Another girl, just like you, has a date with Matt tonight, he whispered as he walked towards the door with me. I'm going to bring you and Brittany to the abandoned farmhouse out on Alston Road, and then we're going to have some fun. Thud. I was thrown into the trunk. Slam. The lid came down. The car rumbled beneath me. The tears fell hot and fast. Cold sweat soaked my shirt. How was I so stupid? I actually thought some guy on the internet was the real thing. That he liked me. Now I'm going to die. Oh, Mom, Dad, Teresa, Rachel. I fell against the side of the trunk as the car swung in a turn. And that other girl, Brittany, if only I could warn her. My sobs were muted against the gag. She's going to die, too, with me. She just wanted a guy to notice her, like me. The car halted to a stop. I tried to scream. I tried to thump against the sides. I tried everything I could to make as much noise as possible. Maybe someone would notice. Slam. I felt the front door close as he got out. No, don't do it. Run, run, run. I thought, as if I could somehow warn her through my mind. But then I heard something else. Shouting. Muffled through the metal, but I could still make out the words. Hands in the air. And then crack. The trunk popped open. There stood a police officer. He's got one in here, he yelled. By some miracle, Brittany had been a sting set up by the police. After searching Johnson's house, they found 3 bodies in the basement. Of girls my age, probably desperate, outcast, and feeling like they finally found true love in Matt. As for me, I'm grounded basically forever. The bracelet turned out to be a $5 fake, and my sister is still looking for her missing underwear. I'm going through counseling, but things are looking up. There's even a guy in my class who seems to like me. But don't worry, I'm never going to meet him at his house. 9th story. I was someone's misconnection on Craigslist. It had a bite as it hit my taste buds. The liquid was much too sour. Its bitter flavor gave me a jolt. As I looked over to hear the gurgling of milk coming from the shaggy barista wearing a band t-shirt of the National. I couldn't tell if he was new, but his messy brown hair and face told me it was apathy. It was a shame because usually my espresso was usually good when I stopped by. It was a diversion from an old friend named Jensen. He was a good guy overall. He had spent the last half hour talking about his work, and I was beginning to lose interest. He wasn't distracting enough to get me out my own head and the discomfort I felt. I hated being out in public these days. Enough about me. What have you been up to? Jensen asked, as he leaned back in his chair, taking a sip from his coffee filled with too much cream and sugar. It amazed me how he stayed so fit drinking so much dairy and sweetener. He looked as he did for years. He was skinny, but well-toned, with sandy blonde hair and dreamy blue eyes. I've been good just living my life and going back to school. I need a new career. Yeah, I understand the need for that. How is everything outside of work? I asked. It's the usual. I still go out with the old crew every weekend. They have been asking about you. Maybe you should come out sometime. What the hell could I possibly do with you guys? I asked sharply. I don't know, you could just hang out. Then we can go lift weights at the gym and hit up a bar like old times. I mean, we could do some yoga or something. You're not really my speed these days, Jen, I replied. It wasn't like the old times. I had traded my stiff drinks of tequila for coffee and the weights for binge-watching shows on Netflix. It was a lifestyle that Jensen could never understand. I'm sorry, dude. I've just never been the coffee shop type guy. It seems like a place for Tinder and potential misconnections to me. Misconnections? His eyes lit up. You've never heard of misconnections? The ones on Craigslist are the best. No, I don't have a clue, I replied as I watched Jensen retrieve his phone. He seemed almost excited as he typed away on his phone. The sound of the surrounding chatter started to make me feel insecure. I imagined that everyone was watching us wondering what I was doing with this meathead, but at one point, I was just like him. He laughed loudly for a second, and it made feel like I stood out like a sore thumb. I saw you at the Best Buy, Jensen said loudly, with a smile on his face. You were wearing a black cap and wore a pair of gray jeans. I've been dreaming of stripping you of them since I saw you that day. What are you talking about? He grinned. It's the misconnection section on Craigslist. It's where people think they have a connection with someone in public, and they post it hoping that the person will see it and reach out to them. That sounds kind of sad, Jen. If you mean sad as in hilarious. If you say so, dude, I said as I took a sip of coffee. I looked around for a moment as Jensen kept reading and giggling like a little schoolboy. He put his phone down when he saw it started to annoy me. So, anyway, you seeing anyone? The question made me uneasy, but I knew he would bring it up. It had been quite a while since we had seen one another, and it was a fair question to ask, but my insecurities started to come up. Not at the moment, I muttered. You need to get back out there, man. Yeah, I hear that from everyone. Jensen leaned forward. That's because they are right. We don't want to see you waste away being miserable. My life is a little different now, I replied, irritated, as I looked at him. It was easy for him to say. His life had not changed. He could do the same things with little effort and without a thought. He knew he had hit a nerve. I'm sorry, man. I meant nothing by it. It's fine, I'm still just working on things both mentally and physically. Yeah, you'll get there, but I have to get going. I'll be late for work, he said, as he began to stand up. I tried to follow him, but struggled and stumbled a bit. I watched his eyes and saw the look of pity. I hated it. It took a moment to regain my balance. We began to walk out the store as Jensen started to shuffle ahead. It took him a moment, but he turned around. Shit, I am sorry, he said remorsefully. It's fine, I just can't move like I used to. I caught up to him as we looked over at his motorcycle. He was still riding the 1000R, and it was still in great condition. It was his pride and joy, but looking at it made my body ache. Jensen gave a light smile and moved into hugging me. It was good to see you. We need to keep in touch, man, because I miss you. I promise I will do better. Well, let's do this again next week, and you should read some of those misconnections. You will get a kick out of them. We departed, and I headed out to run my errands. I could feel his little eyes staring at me as I walked down the aisle to grab some cereal and coffee. It was an innocent look. He tugged at his mother's pant leg as I struggled to crouch down to grab my favorite blend. He couldn't be older than 5 with dark brown hair and little brown eyes that studied me as I grabbed the bag of coffee. I turned to him and let out a little smile, but I knew it was coming as his mother turned to look over to me. Mommy, what is wrong with that man over there? He asked. She looked a lot like her child, but at the moment, her eyes widened and her cheeks turned red. She glanced down to her son with a shaming look and then back to me. I am so sorry, she said. It's okay, miss. I know he meant nothing by it, I assured her. I grabbed a box of cereal and walked back down the aisle. I tried to be mindful of every step as I strolled toward the checkout. It was probably me, but I could feel the eyes of everyone staring at me as I stood in line. I needed something to take my mind off of it, so I did what Jensen suggested. I looked at the misconnections. One caught my eye, though. It made me think that Jensen had decided to tease me. I read the title and then clicked it. The handsome man I saw at the coffee shop on 8th Street. You were sitting there with a blonde man who seemed full of himself. You looked miserable at times, and it made me sad to see you like that. I will be in touch. Smiley face. I picked up my phone and dialed Jensen and went to voice my mail. You are a real asshole, but I will give you credit because I am handsome, I joked before hanging up. It was the last I thought about it. I sat on my couch, debating what to watch on Netflix when my phone began to ring. It took a moment for me to lift myself off of my couch and to walk to the table where my phone was charging. I looked to see it was Jensen returning my call. I retrieved it and answered, "Hello, Mr. Funny Guy. While I agree that you are a very handsome man, I have to ask, what did I do? The post about us at the coffee shop? I don't know what you were talking about." "Oh, I am so sure it's coincidental that you told to look on there, and now someone is describing me. Seriously, I don't follow. What do you mean a post that described you? You posted a misconnection on Craigslist, Jensen. No, I did not, but I wish I had because that would have been amazing to see the look on your face, he replied as I shuffled over back to my couch. I relaxed back, waiting for me to respond. He probably had a huge smile on his face. It was a good one, but I am hanging up now until you think a better way to lie. It wasn't me. I was too busy today to do anything and I'm not even that clever. We all have our moments, Jen, I replied as I hung up the phone and went back to missed connections. Jensen would probably delete it now that I had caught him, but something else stood out. It was another one from an hour ago. It was at the store where I had run into the child that stared at me. This is for the good-looking man who bought my favorite coffee at Walter Market. I saw you again today. I know you hate when strangers look at you, but you have nothing to be ashamed of because you are perfect the way you are. Don't ever feel bad about yourself. Love. I found it strange. It had to be a joke, but also I didn't see Jensen following me because that would require too much commitment. It started to make me feel a little worried the more I thought about it. It was a bit creepy. The only thing that distracted me was the ache in my right thigh. I had done a lot more walking today than usual. I decided it was time to change and try to take my mind off the weirdness. They couldn't be possibly talking about a person like me. I walked into my bedroom to retrieve some sweatpants and a t-shirt. I stripped down looking at my body. I was once a man in great shape, but now that muscle had now been replaced with ugly scars that riddled my torso and lower body. It was the big one that bothered me the most. It was the metal rod and fake foot that made my right leg. They saved my life that night, and multiple surgeries allowed me to still function. The one thing they couldn't save was my leg. It took months to get this one, and I was still getting used it. I lumbered around like a robot in a bad sci-fi movie, and it was the reason to me being insecure. I cursed the drunk driver who ran a red light and crashed into the right side of my motorcycle. It was a night that changed everything. He robbed me more than just a fully functioning body that night. The sound of my phone went off again, and I answered it. Dude, you need to call the police? It was Jensen who sounded concerned. What's going on? I asked, a bit startled. I stood in my bedroom, only in a pair of boxer briefs, and clenching the phone tightly. I am reading to the man apartment 124 in Building D. My heart pounded as I looked out the bedroom window. It was my building and my apartment number. It was either a sick joke that Jensen was playing or someone had followed me home. What does it say? It says, as I watch you strip to your clothes with a look of disgust, I still find you perfect just the way you are. How could this? Call the police now. I'm on my way. He shouted loudly. It's true, a voice said behind me as I froze in fear. I slowly turned my head, trying to remain calm while I dialed 911. It was what behind me that shocked me to the core. I could even feel a phantom pain in my missing leg as I looked on. A woman with light brown hair stood behind me in my doorway. She had piercing hazel eyes and with a soft face. She looked the same as she did that night, wearing her gray blouse and dark denim jeans. She smiled at me as I struggled to gain my bearings. It was impossible for her to be here. I lost her that night along with my leg. While I was lucky enough to survive the accident, she had not. I walked away with a crushed leg, but my girlfriend Holly got stuck underneath the driver's tires. It crushed her that night. I could still remember the sound of her bones being crunched underneath the weight of the car. What are you doing here? I asked. I didn't like to mention her because I felt guilty for that night. While I may have lost a leg, the biggest thing I lost that night was her. The thought of her eyes and smile were too much to bear. I just wanted you to know, even without your leg, that you are still perfect to me, and you should never feel insecure. 10th story. Trust the men on Craigslist. If you're going to judge me for meeting a stranger on Craigslist, I'd prefer that you stop reading right now. I live with enough internal judgment as it is. I was 20. I had a used 1999 blue-green Toyota Corolla, social anxiety, and $19.13 in my bank account. It was the first semester of my junior year at Carleton College, and there were half a dozen get-togethers every weekend that I was running out of excuses to avoid. So I decided that babysitting would be the perfect way to spend my Friday nights. The thought of spending my weekend nights all alone, studying, while making $9 an hour soothed my neurons more than I could possibly say. Don't judge me. You don't know my life. So when I found Amy on Craigslist, everything seemed perfect. Chloe was 5, Ivan was in his terrible 2s. Get it? After a week of email and text exchanges, I felt like I really knew her. She was 33 years old and a stay-at-home mom who was itching to get back into the workforce. "You're perfect," she had disclosed several times via text. Nothing seemed sketchy. And if you can't make a leap of faith at least once in a while, doesn't that make for a miserable and empty existence? I was the consummate professional. I had a pantsuit and everything. Yes, I was wearing Converse to a job interview, but it was kid-friendly, and I was ready to charm the shit out of those kids. I pulled the Corolla in front of the house at 7:30 p.m. for the 8 o'clock interview, then sat and stared out the windshield for 20 minutes before walking in 10 minutes early. Because, the anxiety. It was already dark by that time in the Minnesota October, and I slipped my way up the frozen cement walkway in an oversized parka and mittens. I rang the doorbell with my thumb and waited. As I watched my breath rise up in plumes, I imaged all the bad things that might be happening behind that door. I couldn't help it. I was relieved when it finally opened, and extremely tense when it wasn't Amy. Unless Amy was a baby-faced man-child with a creepy smile. He stared at me, pale-faced, for several awkward seconds. Then his eyes started to gravitate past my neck and toward my chest. I stated awkwardly. His eyes snapped back up to mine, and he offered a delighted smile. "Come on in." Amy, she's my aunt, and she's in the back with Chloe and Ivan." I watched the steam rise in front of me as I breathed a sigh of relief. He knew everyone's name. That meant he could be trusted, right? I walked into the house, past the staircase, and he snapped the door shut behind me. It was a pretty nice place, to be honest. He walked past me, deeper inside, without offering to take my coat. I waited for a beat, then took it off, looked around, and left it on the floor. I really didn't want to inconvenience anyone by asking where I should put it. I kept the mittens on, because my pantsuit had no pockets. Trotting quickly, I followed him into the kitchen. We went through and came out into a living room, where he sat down on the couch. He patted the cushions next to him. I froze in place at the thought of sitting next to a stranger. After an uncomfortable silence, I finally addressed the stranger, which I hate doing. "So, will I be meeting the kids tonight?" I paused, because I thought I'd be meeting the kids tonight. I was an eloquent speaker. "Amy wants you to interview with me," he said in voice that tried to be smooth, but was just creaky. He licked his lips. "I have to pee," I announced chipperly. "Which way?" The man-child looked genuinely confused. It's the room with the toilet in it." This raised an alarm. One of the very uncomfortable things about social anxiety is knowing that there is sometimes legitimate anxiety that needs to be separated from the things that my friends see to placate me. Do you know that feeling you get when you're about to encounter an ex, who you're totally over but not really, for the first time in months, knowing that he'll be showing up with another woman? Combine that with looking over the edge of a 3-story roof while watching a kid faceplant on the concrete and knocking out his front teeth. That's the level of anxiety that consumes me when I can't control it. I couldn't control it in that moment. I tried to think of something to say, but just gave up and walked out of the living room. The bathroom is the sanctuary of the anxiety-stricken, so I darted my face all around the house in search of one. My eyes landed on a hallway lined with photos, so I headed in that direction with the hopes that it would lead me out of sight. I was walking through the hallway when I stopped. The photos on the wall were all of the same family. They didn't look much like the man-child at all. A couple who looked to be in their 60s was featured in every one. They were probably 20 years past childbearing age with flecks of white in their hair. Both were thin and black, which stood in stark contrast to the round-faced, pale man-child in the living room. 3 children appeared in various photos with them, all of whom were in their late teens. I thought about the living room. There were no toys. Chloe is 5. I looked to the blank white fridge. There were no drawings stuck to its surface. Ivan is 2. There was no baby gate at the staircase. You're perfect. And that's when my anxiety went into overdrive. I would have had to go past the living room to exit through the front door. So instead I turned and trotted down the hall. I thought that I heard man-child stand up, but I wasn't interested in sticking around long enough to find out how much of it was my own imagination. I emerged into a small room with tall vases on the floor that's kid-friendly and realized I was at the end of the house. There was no back door. I tried to open the window, but it was locked. I fumbled with the hitch. I couldn't use my fingers with the mittens binding them, and was unable to open it. My panicked mind told me I don't have time to take off the mittens while I definitely heard a man-child walking through the house, and I finally grasped the hitch, and it slowly spun around until the window was unlocked, and I pushed and pushed and pushed until it finally opened in a whoosh of cold air. I climbed into the frosty night, but my Converse caught something on the way out. I don't know if it was the sill or if it was a hand. I tumbled onto the ground, lay still for half a second, and scrambled to my feet. This was the backyard. I was still far away from my car. Shit. I ran around the side of the house, trying to stay quiet. Instead, I knocked over a trash barrel. A cat screamed. Damn it. As I moved forward, the Corolla began to emerge in the distance, and I started running toward it. That was a mistake. Man, was that ground icy. Who knew that a tailbone could hurt so much when it hit the floor? I got up and walked briskly, my feet sliding every which way along the frozen concrete as I approached my car. My hands were rattling from cold, nerves, and pain. I tried to get my key through the lock, but it wouldn't go in. Tears streaming, I pinched the tip, aimed it at the keyhole, and forced it. Goddamn value edition Corolla with no remote locks. I opened the door, threw myself in, started the car, and peeled away without waiting for the engine to warm up. 3 blocks away, I was about ready to give myself permission to cry. The sensation of wrongness hit me then, but it took a second to understand why my spatial orientation was off. There wasn't supposed to be a head in the back seat reflecting from the rearview mirror. I screamed and turned the car toward a tree. The crash wasn't bad, but the airbags deployed. Given the speed I'd been going, it didn't hurt any worse than my tailbone did. I pushed open the car, dropped to the ground, and threw up. Once my gut was clear, I sprinted into the woods and hid in the shadow. After 5 minutes had passed, I was about ready to admit that I'd imagined the head in the mirror. I stood up and took 1 step forward when the rear, driver's side door opened. A shadow stepped out, slammed the door behind it, and walked away down the road. 2 hours passed before the fear of hypothermia finally coaxed me from my hiding spot. I had left my parka in the house. I never told the police about the man in my car. Who would have believed me? Facing the inevitable skepticism was more than I could bear. I said that a cat had run in front of me, and that I'd steered toward the tree in an attempt to avoid it. My anxiety had forced me to plan 10 contingency stories for the police if they asked too many of the wrong questions. In the end, though, they simply decided that my car was safe to drive, flipped their notebook into a pocket, and left. I drove straight to my dorm room and stayed there until classes resumed on Monday. I peed in a Gatorade bottle because I was afraid to open the door. My borderline anorexia stormed past its threshold, and I actually felt better skipping meals for 3 days. I told myself that it was better to keep secrets, that no one would believe me, that even if someone did, it wouldn't do any good. So there was no risk worth seeming crazier than I already was. It helped me to sleep at night. For 13 days. At the end of October, a woman named Catherine and Olson tried to meet Amy from Craigslist for a babysitting gig. Amy wasn't real, but Michael John Anderson was. He murdered Catherine when she arrived. He'd been planning it for some time. Michael will spend the rest of his life in jail, God willing. It's impossible to forgive myself for keeping my story a secret. The knowledge that I was so close to dying, and saving someone else in doing so, has set fire to every nerve in my body. I had to drop out of school. I was never able to drop back in. That night has shattered my life. Paranoia, fear, and guilt are as omnipresent as sound and light. In a way, I'll spend the rest of my life in jail too. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.